Hello, everyone. This is Malki Assad, and welcome to the second episode of the Pathway to Medical Residency in Canada. In the first episode, we covered the requirements for the Canadian match, and in this episode, we'll talk about the match process and the interview cycle. So, welcome, Ropin, back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So, we ended the last episode by talking about all the requirements needed as a foreign grad to apply to the Canadian match. As a foreign grad, after I submit my application, what happens? What is important in the selection process for me to receive an interview?
So there are many factors that plays role in the selection process, and actually it's different from my understanding. So when they look for Canadian medical graduates versus international medical graduates, so for international medical graduates, what is like I can say what is important, but this might be different based from one program to another and based on your CV in general. But the important things are, one, it's like the medical school.
So
For example,
I'm sure also different specialties look for different things.
exactly, yes, that's right as well. Like different, like some specialties prefer research, some specialists prefer experience, some specialists it's really different. But in general, broadly speaking, so like the medical school that you came from, one of the things that I've noticed here in Canada that people who unfortunately were not able to go into medical school here in Canada, they went to Ireland or like Europe in general, and they studied medicine there, and then they came back. So those are considered Canadians who studied abroad, or they can be categorized under IMG as well, International Medical Graduate. So some programs in general, um, might have a better idea about matching those people, because like over the years they matched people who went to specific schools and they know how the education is there. So you might find it more comfortable matching people from a specific area or specific school because they know how is the education there. But this is not like um, a main factor or limiting factor. I've noticed that many programs are really open to, they don't even depend on their decision on the school. There are many other factors. The second thing I believe for international medical graduate is your um, marks, your scores actually. As an IMG, I felt like the scores are really, really, really important. And that's how they usually select people to come and interview based on their scores. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, that the NAC OSCE score is really important, and it still applies in this case. So the NAC OSCE score and the MCC QE1 score are really important. I have that feeling that the NAC OSCE is more important, but I feel like this also might change because like the QE1, it's a new exam and there are new criterias being used by different programs. And now the QE1 is delivered internationally, unlike the previous year where it was delivered only in Canada. So your scores as an IMG are really important. But again, it's not the only, or like if you have low scores, that doesn't mean that you can't match. During the matching process and during the previous years, I've met many international medical graduates or IMGs who had really bad, like they went through bad situation, or they had a bad experience, and unfortunately for some reason or another they weren't able to like score really high, but they are really bright and hardworking individuals, and they ended up matching. So that brings me to the third factor, which is creating connections and establishing connections in the place that you want to work. Like by that I mean doing an elective or doing an observership in a place and knowing the people or doing research there helps a lot, makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree with that, and that also happens here in the US. Although scores are important, but there are many other factors that can play a role. Before we dive into the research and the clinical experience, I wanted to expand a little bit on the tests. I remember you mentioned something about specific exams for each province. Do the
Mhm.
exams and the scores in these exams matter as the NAC and the MSCCQE one?
I believe, I think actually, yes. It depends more on the program than the province. That's my understanding. Because like there are some programs who will ask you to write the Casper exam, which is more like an exam based on ethical situations that you face on daily life, in daily life. Like it's not medical at all. And they might use that the Casper score as a screening. So people who score like above a specific score, like they might get interviews, and people who didn't score high on the Casper exam, they might not get an interviews. But again, this depends more on the program. For an example, in my year, like I think it was in Manitoba, where one of the program I applied to internal medicine, and I think they did not ask for the Casper exam, but I think the family medicine in Manitoba or the pediatrics at that year asked for that exam, and they use it as a screening criteria. So it's more dependent on the program than the province.
I see. So the two general exams are important everywhere, but the specific
Correct.
exams, their importance vary depending on the program.
Yes.
That's important to know. So now for the clinical experience, as a foreign grad, what opportunities do I have? Can I do electives, observers, and which one do you recommend? And what's the difference between these two?
That's a good question, actually. So we have to establish between two things. One, if you were lucky and you came here early, or you had the chance to come here early while you are in medical school and like you're still a student, for sure doing elective is the best. So like because it's easier, uh, and like you can have more hands-on experience, and the people who will write your letter of reference, they can say that you had a hands-on experience, you saw patient, you examined patient by yourself, and they can mention that in their letter, which helps. And even booking an elective is much more easier. But for me, I wasn't like lucky enough to come here while I was in medical school. So I came here after graduation. So the only chance I had is doing observerships. Um, so doing observerships here, for me, I'm just going to tell you like briefly the process. But please don't be frustrated because it takes long time. So what I've done is like, let's say I choose an X hospital. I go to their website, I find doctors, I read about them. I like the usual hospitals mention their doctor emails, and I start emailing them saying, telling them that I'm an international graduated med school here. This is my CV. I'm really interested in this specialty. I would appreciate the chance to have an observership. A bit it was frustrating because like I had to send hundreds of emails until I got 2 or 3 responses. It's not an easy one, but it's worth it and it's doable. But the main take home point is please don't get frustrated. People here are really busy. And if they don't respond to you, try to send a gentle reminder in 2 weeks as a follow-up email, asking them if they had the chance to see your previous email and you just wanted to follow up with them. It takes time, it takes a lot of emails, and that's normal. I remember when I tried to like find observerships, uh, I sent like many emails to different doctors. And you can, not only in the hospital, you can do observerships, even in the clinics, like an internal medicine clinic or family medicine clinic. If you know a physician, if you're new to a community and it happens that you know a physician in that community, you just ask him like if this physician can give you the chance to do an observership. So those are like becomes under the clinical experience category.
And that's
Very
important
helpful.
because as you said, if I understood correctly, that the elective You have to be a student. You have to be in Canada before you graduate. You have the chance to do a hands-on experience and a lot of recommendation testifying your clinical skills. While on you observer, you probably are a graduate. You don't have to have the hands-on experience, but it's a good way for you to get in touch with the Canadian medical system.
Correct, but like for elective, you don't need to be in Canada to apply for an elective. Like if you're outside of Canada, like let's say somewhere in the Middle East or Europe, like UK, you are still medical students. You can email the universities here, and you can book an elective. So you don't need to be here in Canada physically to book an elective.
Okay.
Just to like.
And I think the externship and the clinical experience topic can be a whole episode by itself to talk about how you can get one, what the details that can help you to identify an elective or observer.
Yes, yes, yes. Like it took me like a lot of time, and I'm happy to talk about it in different episodes.
And I assume that you get most of your letters of recommendation that you need to apply to. We mentioned in the first episode that you need at least three letters of recommendation from your elective slash observers.
Correct, yes. And to be honest with you guys, in observership, uh, maybe like you're not having that hands-on experience, or maybe you work as a physician assistant and you help in the clinic, so you have hands-on experience. Maybe your supervisor doesn't feel comfortable enough to like write that in your letter of reference, but make sure that you show interest. Make sure to ask questions to at least take them through your thinking process, and show them how you think, and show them your differential diagnosis, and participate in the case discussions, because like this will help them to write something about your knowledge and help the programs in guiding their decision.
Yeah, I totally agree. Here in the US, although elective is held more of way more importance than observers because people can see your clinical experience. But I know people who match in amazing programs without electives because they show this passion, this hard work, this medical knowledge during their observers.
I totally agree. Same here in Canada.
So, usually, does the letters of recommendation submitted in a waived way? Because here in the US, if you ask somebody to write a letter for you, you usually send them an email through the match website and they send the email directly to the ESFMG. Does it happen the same way in Canada, or you take the actual PDF file and you upload it yourself?
No, actually, it's the same here. In like we, it can happen like by like asking your supervisor to send the email directly to the CARMS, which is the preferred way, where you don't see the letter, and you can upload it as a PDF. Like you can do both, but like for sure, like it's much more better when you ask your supervisor to write you a letter before the CARMS, like month or two, and then when the CARMS application opens, so you send a link to your supervisor to your application. Your supervisor will log in and will upload the letter, and this letter will go directly to the CARMS, and from the CARMS it will be distributed to the program, so you will not see the letter. Like this is much more better, and this is how it should be.
I see, I see. What about the research experience? Does it play a role in selecting applicants for residency spots or not?
Well, the research experience, it's one of the tricky things, because it does and it doesn't. To be honest with you, it's not, my feeling and my understanding is when they are looking for applicants, some programs that say like neurology, they're really interested in people who have a lot of research. Family medicine, maybe not. I'm not sure. I might be wrong as well. Um, so it depends on the program. This is the first. The second thing is, if you don't have a research, that is not the end of the world, because they don't really accept people with tons of research and PhDs and math. That helps. That helps. I'm not saying it does not, but if you don't have this experience, for me, I never had research experience at all when I applied, like zero research experience when I applied. And I tried to do, right now in residency, I'm trying to do research and reading about research because I want to do research. I love research. For the program, I think when they're evaluating a candidate, an IMG, they look to their scores, where they came from, their achievement, their extracurricular things. If you're a really hardworking person, if you have really great scores, if you have really good letters of reference, if you have a personal statement which is really inspiring, so at this point, like, they won't really care about the research because it sounds and it looks like you're a really hardworking person. So they don't really overthink about it because they know once you're in the residency, you will find the research and you will work on it. It's part of, it's mandatory, like usually in residency, to do research. But of course, if you have research that is helpful, really helpful, and make sure that usually to mention the research and to be like more research, like you research, like don't say to a family medicine program that you have tons of research in pathology or like let's say neurology, because like it doesn't show your interest in family medicine. So it's something just you have to pay attention for.
Reflects your interest.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it should be. Sometimes people are not sure what they do, so it's always good to have some publications. But if you decided on a specialty, it's always best if you have research in that specific field.
Yes.
And as at the end of the day, we have to agree that residency is a clinical job. Although having research helps you uh, better think in an evidence-based manner, but at the end of the day, you have to focus on the clinical skills that you will be accruing during your residency.
Actually, you mentioned really important point. I totally agree with you 100%. Residency, it's a clinical job. Research, it's like something. Residency, it's another thing. Residency, it's experience and how you apply your background information that you study in medical school, and you're able to take care of patients, which is different from doing research. Programs, they want a good resident. By that I mean a resident who see an extra consult, who stay an extra hour, who comes an hour earlier, a resident who's always happy to do the work. It really doesn't matter if you have tons of research, because as you mentioned, which is like a great way to phrase it, it's a clinical job.
Yes, I totally agree, but I always believe that the best clinicians are those who have a good research background and amazing clinical experience, because you can apply both in, different ways and can help you always help your patients by giving them the best treatment with the best evidence from what's happening in the field.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
So I don't think we'll cover interviews during this episode. That would probably take its own episode.
Yes, that would be better.
Through the match process, and a question everybody asks: why Canada is harder to match in compared to other countries, for example, the US?
That's a good question, actually, and there is a lot of like dilemma around that. So let's start around the match process. So the match process, it's really similar to the US. Like it's not really different, and usually like two matches, like you can apply to both the Canadian and the American, and if you match in Canada, so you'll be withdrawn automatically from the US.
Because
So it's,
you believe the Canadian results come before the.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So the process is similar to the US. It's an online application, electronic application, where like you upload or another party or another website called physicianapply.ca, where your marks are uploaded. They will be transferred to the CARMS website. The CARMS is Canadian Residency Match Service website. And in that website, you will upload your letter of references, or it will be uploaded by your supervisors. You'll upload your personal statement, you will upload your CV, your picture. It's pretty similar to the US. And then you're going to choose programs and you're going to apply to these programs. And CARM's website, or the CARMS, the Canadian Residency Match Service, send those electronic documents to the programs that you apply to. And usually application starts in September and ends November. So usually I think it's a 2 or 3 month period where you have the time to upload all the documents and apply. So it's really similar to the US. And then you get interviews, and then you go on an interview, and then like you have the match results. So broadly speaking, like this is the process in general. The second part is why Canada is harder than matching, or why it's harder to match in Canada when compared to the US. Actually, it's multifactorial. I can't say like it's only one reason for that. So first, like the number of programs and the number of seats available in Canada is less when compared to the US. So in the US, like you have community programs which offer seats, and you have university programs. In Canada, it's only university programs. There aren't any community programs, and it's all funded by the government. So this is one of the factors. The second factor is the competitiveness of the process. So as I mentioned earlier, like if we say like we have 100 seats, let's say, 90% of those seats are filled, approximately 90%, this changes by the year, are filled by the Canadian medical graduates. Then you will end up by 10%, approximately again, 10% of the seats, they will filled by the international medical graduates. And here you have two things to consider. When we say international medical graduates, under this umbrella, we're also talking about Canadians who studied abroad, and also people who immigrated from other countries and came here, or came here as refugees, and they're applying to the medical system to work here as physicians. So all these are competing together. So as an IMG, for me, let's say I did my med school in Syria. When I applied, I was competing with Canadians who studied abroad, people who were raised here. They had a better maybe language, or they understood the culture. So those are soft skills that usually the programs they look at. But at the end I matched, and it's not the end result, but those are the small things that makes the process harder. If we compare this to the US, like people immigrate to the US, or like they apply for a B1 visa, B2 visa, or J1 visas, which are visas for working and visas to just visit the US and apply. So, and they are not competing against US citizens who went abroad and studied and they came back. I think that's my understanding in the US. I'm not really sure though.
Yes,
So
I agree, because if I understood correctly, you summarized the reasons for having difficulty in matching in Canada in two main reasons. First, the spots are limited because the government kind of control the total number of residency spots in the country. And the second reason is that there is a quota, approximately 10% for those who studied in medical schools outside Canada. And this
correct.
10%, you're not only competing with international medical graduates, you're competing with Canadian citizens who did not do medical school in Canada but are coming back to do residency in Canada.
Exactly.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, there is no quota in the US. So the program can take no applicants, and they can take up to the whole number of their residents as international medical graduates. So that might be the main difference.
Yes, here we have like 5 seats, for an example, for IMGs versus like 22 seats for Canadian medical graduates. And for those 5 seats, like 30 or 40 or 50 or sometimes even more people compete. Some of them are Canadians who studied abroad, and some of them are international medical graduates who came from other countries.
And that makes probably the process way harder.
Yeah, it does.
So that brings us to the end of our second episode. In this episode, we covered the match process and why Canada is more difficult to get in as a medical resident compared to other countries. If you like this episode, please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Malki Assad. In the next episode, we'll talk about European experience in matching into internal medicine. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next episode.